Kia ora tātou, ko Andrew Sargent toko ingoa. Today is the second instalment of the webinars going over the Level 2 AgHort exam. So today we're going over physical factors. These webinars are brought to you in sort of cooperation with Study It. So if you have any questions after this webinar with Kelly, you can just go to Study It and ask them there. So without further ado, over to you, Kelly.
Hello, welcome. So back again from yesterday. So today we're looking at standard 91290, so demonstrating understandings of techniques used to modify physical factors of the environment for the New Zealand plant production. Quite a mouthful. So today how we're going to structure it is firstly look at physical factors and what those are. Then we're going to move into plant processes and production, which is moving you into merit sort of area, and then looking at the techniques that are used to modify the physical factors. So if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat and Andrew will get them to me. Hopefully I'll be able to answer them as we go through. Okay, on the page, the screen that you'll see now is just the requirements for each of those levels. We're going to go over each of these again as we go through. I will go break it up into what is required for each achievement, merit and excellence. So pretty much if you were on yesterday or you've looked at yesterday's one, similar sort of format as that. Okay, so and then I'll cover the merit and excellence words as well in more depth later on. But you're more than welcome to pause here and read all that information. But for now, I will continue on. Okay, so what are physical factors? This is the guts of the whole standard. So physical factors are basically those environmental factors that are not caused by a living organism. So if you've done biology, this is often called abiotic factors. So these are a huge range of factors. Your assessment exam will not cover all of these. They will select some and they will then give you some questions on a selected few. Okay, a question might have two in it. For example, you might look at temperature and light together. But basically, you need to be able to pass two questions in the exam. So you have to cover two physical factors, and you have to be looking at different management practices. So a minimum of two techniques as well. So we will cover that in a moment. Okay, so huge range from there. I'm just going to go now through what each of these mean. So you have to have a good understanding of those physical factors to be able to do well. So in this case, light is just talking about sunshine hours, light intensity and photosynthesis, light waves and colour, so a little bit of physics in there, and plant responses to light, which is more of a type of biology, so looking at phototropism and photoperiodism. So you need to understand what light does, how it impacts the environment, and therefore how does it impact plants and how they grow. So in particular, we look here at the latitude. So different latitude gets different light. The slope of the land, so north facing in the southern hemisphere has more light than south facing. Some areas have more cloud cover, so that reduces the amount of light, and wind can play an impact on that, particularly with cloud cover. So you have less light. Then in terms of intensity, so how much is applied during the day will affect, so less light obviously early morning and in the evening and none at night. So the hottest period of the day or the more light is usually at midday. Different seasons have different amount of light, so to do with how far away we are from the sun. Once again, back to latitude and your slope of the land or your topography, how your land lies and where it is will depend on how much light you receive. So that is direct relationship to photosynthesis. And then we look at wavelengths and colour. So dependent on the type of colour and the length of the light coming through, so Roy G. Biv, you will depend on how much the plant grows. So this is the background per se to light. Now, the effect that light has on plants is it controls that rate of photosynthesis. So this part moves you into the merit. So it's what things you can do to increase or decrease that photosynthesis. So light also heats up the air, so you provide a higher temperature as well. So the greater intensity of light absorbed by the plant, the more photosynthesis that can take. Remember, photosynthesis is used to make glucose, and therefore it is required in the energy building for the plant. So it uses it to grow. If it doesn't get enough photosynthesis, it does not grow or doesn't grow very well. So it increases that sugar potential, that production, and therefore that the plant uses it to grow buds, to grow fruit, to grow more roots. And the way it gets that light will determine how well it grows. So also day length, for example, determines the maturity of some crops. So some crops only mature in some particular times of the year, and that's to do with the amount of light it receives. Where that light comes from will also determine how well a plant grows. So if a plant is in a dark area, it will grow towards the light. So we can manipulate our plants to grow in a particular way. Okay, next one is looking at temperature. Now, some of these are interrelated, so some will apply to other factors as well. So in here, we need to understand why we grow plants, where we grow them, and often that is determined by temperature. For example, things that require a lot of heat hours are usually grown more to the north or in northerly facing areas, such as Nelson. And if it's a colder crop, then it will grow further south. So we need to understand what our temperature range is for our crops. So what is the minimum or the lowest temperature that they can maintain growth at? What is the maximum temperature? What do they like to sit at, which is usually its mean? What is its critical? So that is its absolute maximum. Over that or its lowest, under that, it will die. And what is its optimum? What does it really prefer? And generally, that's where we want to grow our crops. You need to have some idea of growing degree days. That is the accumulated amount of heat over a period of time above a base temperature for a particular area. So some crops have specific growing degree days, and they require that in which to grow to set fruit, etc. Different crops have different ones. So, for example, apples are much lower because they require some cold period in comparison to tomatoes, which require higher degree growing days. So, depending on your crop will depend on what it is. Soil temperature plays an important part. Seeds will not germinate if the soil temperature is too low. So, maize, for example, is normally planted around 12 degrees soil temperature, because that is its preferred germination temperature. You can plant it lower, but often the seeds will just sit there. So you need to know what is the best for the particular crop you're looking at. You also want to have a basic understanding of dormancy, of when it's viable for that seed or that plant to start to grow. So if it's a dormant plant through winter, when will it then continue to start growing? So when is breaking dormancy? And then you have a brief idea of knowing vernalization. So what happens, what temperature is required for bud break or flower initiation. And then some plants require chill requirements. So this is a number of hours below a specific temperature in which to break dormancy. So lots of your dormant plants, your deciduous trees, for example, all require usually a chill requirement. So apples require a certain amount of chill requirements before they will break that dormancy. If they don't get it, they won't set fruit. And so that's where you're moving into your effect of temperature, what it does to the plant. So if the temperature is above the optimum, it increases that rate of photosynthesis, transpiration, respiration, and evaporation. However, it can be negative. If it's too high, it will cause death and it won't obviously grow very well. So you'll have a reduction. If it's too high, you may have damage or burning to flowers or to new buds. And so you can also get wind scald and sun scald if it's too high. Likewise, if it is too low, it can decrease those plant processes, can cause a reduction in that plant's yield. It may mean that plants won't come out of dormancy, they won't germinate because it's too cold. Might have damage such as a frost if the temperature is really low to the plant buds or to the flower buds or even to the fruit, and in some extreme cases will cause death. Okay, so often it can be a negative. That's why we optimize that temperature and we want them to be at the plant's optimum. So whatever crop you're growing, you need to have a rough idea of what their optimum is. Okay, so there is a little bit more on soil temperature and how that affects plant growth. So that's a little bit more in depth. Basically, for soil temperature, you're trying to ensure seed germination. You're also trying to ensure that the roots continue to grow. If it's too cold, they won't grow. And there are things such as microorganism activity. So if it's too cold, also they won't grow, won't be active as well. So under 6 degrees, they don't do much, and above 35 degrees, they don't do much, they die. So, so you need to have a good idea of those. Okay, you can read the rest, pause that and read it. So I will continue on. So frost is an extreme temperature. We've just had a severe frost event right across the country. Some very good learnings probably would have come out of it, and hopefully your teachers shared that with you. But basically, you need to know how frosts behave. So remember, frosts are cold, very cold temperatures, and they sit lower to the ground because hot air rises. So we measure frosts 2 ways. We measure them either the air temperature, so air above the ground, or at ground. Ground is obviously a lot colder. But positive effects and there's negative effects for frosts. And so we need to understand whether our crops and what plants we're looking at, whether they prefer the negative or the positive. So if it's a negative, it means it's going to basically freeze those plant cells. And then when remember, ice expands. So when it freezes and water expands in the cell, and it pops the cell when it starts to thaw because it's expanded too much. So you think about putting a bottle in a freezer. If you've overfilled the bottle, it will pop when it freezes. So that's exactly what it does to the plant cells. So frost is terrible for very new buds or new growth or flowers. They don't like it. It literally kills them. However, some crops are very hardy and they don't mind the frost. So that is why deciduous trees lose their leaves during the winter to prevent this type of thing happening. But when they go to set their flowers and their flowers burst or they've got fruit on, that is a time where it's critical for frost. So unfortunately, in the Waikato a couple of weeks ago, that's exactly what happened, and that we had a negative 11-degree frost here, and it decimated all those crops that had just started flowering. Therefore, you can't get a crop from them because it's burst those cells and they die. So it significantly reduces crop yield. Okay, moving on, we'll look at water. So in this case, New Zealand has a really effective amount of water that we have, but we need to be able to use it wisely. So effective rain is water that goes into the soil and can be used by the plants in the root zone. If it continues through, then that's not effective. If it runs off, that's no use to the plant either. So you're therefore looking at rainfall intensity. We prefer to have periods of long showers, which are just lightly wetting our soil because that's all soaked in. If we get 100 mils in a half an hour, that is pretty much just washed off the surface and goes into our rivers and streams. So we want a long period of time of that same amount of rainfall. So maybe 100 mils over 4 days would be awesome. Evaporation, how much is evaporated by wind or by the sun, and that reduces the amount of water you have. So we have evapotranspiration rates that you need to understand. So that's how much rainfall has occurred, how much evaporation has occurred, but also how much transpiration that the plant has carried out. So most papers have those in there. And it's dependent on your crop once again. Also, other factors affect how much effective rainfall we have, and that is climate, soil structure, so the type of soils you have, whether it's volcanic or clay, silt, loam, if you remember back, or the depth of your root zone, also your topography, is it flat, is it steep, and then once again your evaporation. Okay, so remember you're trying to use that water for plant processes. So that is the use in the stomata, in the transpiration. They use photosynthesis. So ideally you want enough to make sure that photosynthesis is occurring at all times. Plants use water, and they have where we have a saturation point where there's too much water in the soil and therefore they can't get oxygen. So if they can't take oxygen in through their roots, they can't respire. So we prefer not to have a saturation point. We want our plants to be at field capacity, or the soil to be at field capacity, and that is where they have a 50% water holding capacity and 50% air holding capacity, so they can get both oxygen and water. If they're at wilting point, that means there is no water in that soil at all, and so we're getting into really dry conditions or drought conditions. So optimizing, we want at field capacity all the time. So the impact of that on plant growth is, remember, water is required for photosynthesis. If you have too little water, photosynthesis is reduced. If you have too much water, you can't respire. Okay, so you want those to work together well. Remember, water is used for structure for the plant. It holds the plant upright. If your plant doesn't have enough water, it wilts. Okay, and if it's wilting, it is not growing. So you want the plant to be permanently at turgor pressure, so at good structural support. We need water for germination. And we also need water for transporting of those minerals from the soil, but also carbohydrates made from the leaves. So the water is used to transport those around the plant. So water taken from the ground, from the roots going up through the xylem, and you want food coming from the phloem going down back through the plants to all parts, all cells. So water plays a pretty important part in growth. Okay, so along with water, we have humidity. They go hand in hand. Humidity is, remember, the amount of heat and water that's in the air. So you need to be able to understand how to measure humidity and what the relative humidity is for your plants. So if it's really humid, that means there's a lot of water in the air and it's quite hot. But you can also be plants that prefer no humidity, so little water in the air and little heat. Okay, so humidity is higher where there's lots of rainforests, for example, and we try to reduce the amount of water loss from the leaves because it reduces that transpiration. So you're wanting transpiration to occur. It can't get rid of the water if there's high humidity. But we don't want really, really high humidity, but we do often want some humidity because that water in the air as well as the warmth promotes warm growth. Once again, it will depend on the crop that you are looking at. But usually optimum growth means you're optimizing your yields, and that can be more yield, but also your timing of that yield might be earlier if you have good humidity. Okay, so once again, this is temperature and water combined. So hail, remember, is solid particles of ice that have fallen out from the sky. And snow is similar, but it's in ice crystals, and they usually come as flakes, okay? And hail occurs when there is a thunderstorm usually. It can be no thunder associated with it, but it's usually a very cold period, and it freezes that water solid as it comes through the cloud mass, whereas snow tends to be not a sudden thing. It's usually come on. But either way, depending on your crop, they can be quite significant. So hail usually causes extensive physical damage. So it literally just smashes the crop up. If you don't have leaves, you don't have photosynthesis. So therefore, the plant can't continue with its normal functions. If you have got fruit on board or on the plant when hail hits, it damages the fruit and you can't sell it. So 2 years ago on Boxing Day, we had a massive storm in the Nelson area, with hail, and it decimated those crops. And most of them was the fruit, because that's little apples, and they could not be sold because they had dents and holes in them. It also stripped the leaves, put large holes right through the leaves, and therefore photosynthesis was reduced. So if no photosynthesis, no glucose, therefore they can't put that energy into growing. So basically less growth from the plant. If your crop is near harvest and it splits it like in a cherry, you can't sell those. So you can't pick them, or you may not be able to pick them. It marks and bruises them, and therefore you reduce that quality. Some might be able to go to processing, but as you know, processing doesn't sell as much as fresh fruit. If it occurs when there's no crops, no fruit on, you often will just have less yields, and therefore if we move into the sort of the social things, you'll have less employment because harvesting won't occur. Snow, likewise, it usually just freezes the plant, causing major physical damage. Once again, will depend on the crop. If it's trees, often the snow will break branches, reduce the size of that tree and reduce the size of the crop. If you're talking about small herbaceous plants, like you see in the diagram there, they can be crushed and therefore they will not grow. But basically, if snow sets or it's not a crop that was expected to have snow on it, it literally freezes them and they cause death. If it doesn't freeze it often will cause burn marks, and burn marks, once again, on a fruit cannot be sold. So this is quite extreme for New Zealand. We usually have crops that we know that can tolerate some snow, usually a winter crop. If we get an out-of-season snow, such as a Christmas, we have severe problems. Okay, then we move on to air. Now, to be more specific, we want to be looking at carbon dioxide, oxygen, and nitrogen. Okay, these are the three things that we require or get out of the air. So we manipulate, or we can manipulate carbon dioxide. I will talk about that in a moment. We can also manipulate oxygen. We require that for root and respiration. So carbon dioxide is required for photosynthesis. And we use nitrogen for building the building blocks of plant structure. And they can get that both out of the soil and out of the air. Different crops require different things. So we'll just look at carbon dioxide to start first. So this is usually manipulated in indoor environments, usually just by opening the glasshouse door or some windows, but we can also pump carbon dioxide into there. So we get carbon dioxide cylinders, and ideally we want it higher than 0.03%. So usually that's what is in the atmosphere without manipulation. But when we're wanting to increase production, say of tomatoes, capsicums, etc., in glasshouses, we will manipulate that to get a higher CO2 rate, which means photosynthesis will occur more, and therefore we'll have more growth, and this will occur faster. So we will have higher yields. We'll have yields going to market earlier because they can be picked earlier. You have earlier and better flowering, better fruit setting, etc. Okay, so if you're in a glass house, you can manipulate that type of thing. If you're in an outdoor environment, no, you don't manipulate this at all. Looking at oxygen and nitrogen. So remember, we're trying here to ensure that we get good respiration rates. Usually this is just ensuring that we have enough oxygen in the soil. And to do that, we need to have drainage to make sure that that soil is not at saturation point. Okay, so this is in conjunction with water. So usually when water is not there, air is, and in particular we want oxygen. If there's too much water, then there is no oxygen in there. So improving that oxygen rate means that they can respire at their optimum, and therefore they're growing as best as they can. Now, nitrogen is also taken out of the air. That is a macronutrient, and it's required in a large amount. It is mostly for making proteins, though they do use it in nucleic acids, and they're also used in chlorophyll. So it is used in part of the photosynthesis production. Most plants can get it out of most plants get it out of the soil, and that is often why we use host plants such as clover to take that nitrogen out of the air and put it into the ground. So if we're looking at pastures, we will grow a ryegrass clover mix, and the clover is taking that nitrogen out of the air and putting it into the ground to be used. Okay, wind. So wind is basically just a movement of air. It does affect plants if there is too much of it usually. If there's not enough, sometimes that might affect pollination. But basically, if there's too much wind, we get breakages of the plant. So that is where leaves are blown off, and so therefore we can't photosynthesize. If it is windy, they transpire more, so more droplets of air more droplets of water off those leaves will be taken away, so they need more water. We can get rubbing, so if a group of fruit are sitting together and it's windy, they rub against each other. Rub is a poor quality and so therefore can't sell. If it's rocking, the plant's rocking, it breaks the roots. Okay, so some of your big trees in the storms, if this happens too much, it breaks their roots and they will fall. If you're looking at crops such as maize, swirly wind does what we call lodging, and that breaks the stem of the maize or the wheat or the barley, and it falls over. Once that head touches the ground, it is not allowed to be sold for human consumption. Okay, so okay for maize potentially if you're selling for stock food, but wheat and barley, it cannot be harvested. So it's a permanent break in the stem. There's lots of other things that wind can do. You can carry on reading that by pausing the video later. Okay, we're getting just about to the end of the factors, but the next one is topography. So this is the shape of the land, so what it looks like, so and what way it's facing, north, east, south, or west. So we can, north facing provides more sunlight hours, so that often has better growth. It has higher intensity for the light, as we say, on north-facing slopes than it does on flat or facing away from the north, so south-facing, that has less light. We also have micro and mesoclimates, so these are areas that are impacted and have different climatic conditions to, say, the region. So if I look at Whakatane, which has the highest sunshine hours, that is a microclimate, has a lot more sunshine hours than the whole of the Bay of Plenty. Okay, so there is a particular condition to that area. So the impact on that is basically we need to understand how our land is going to affect our production. So flat land or slightly north-facing slopes is going to have more sun, so you have more growth. You need to know where your wind is coming from. What is the prevailing wind? So here in the Waikato where I'm based, our prevailing wind is a westerly. So it comes from the west. If you have a crop that needs to be protected from the wind, then you need to put up a shelter belt on the west side, okay, because you're trying to stop that wind from breaking your plants. We can get wind from other areas, but they're more stormy conditions. Where you are in terms of your slope, so the top of the slope is usually more infertile than the bottom because your minerals and your nutrients have rolled down the hill. So you need to be aware of that. The east coast is drier than the west coast. West coast gets a lot of rain. It's got to go up over those ranges, which is the Southern Alps or in the North Island over the ranges, and it dumps its water before it gets to the east coast. So the east coast is drier than the west coast. Irrigation is required on the east coast, probably not so much on the west coast. Okay, so these things are just things you need to be aware of when you're talking about topography. And then your type of soil. So what is the soil? Is it a clay? Is it a loam? Is it silt? Is it sand? How does that affect your growth? So remember, clay holds on to water and holds on to nutrients. Sand has high drainage. It drains right through very quickly. Okay, so some soils are going to be warmer than others. Ones that contain a lot of water are cold. If your roots are cold, they don't grow as quickly. Different soils hold different nutrients. You need to be aware of that. Volcanic soils don't have cobalt. You need to add those. So depending on where you are in the country, depend on your nutrient status and your mineral deficiencies and your pH. So you need to be aware of those, because if your plants require a certain pH or a certain mineral, then you need to make sure that you add that to your soils. So plants require macro and micronutrients. So macronutrients, remember, in large amounts, micro in small amounts. Plants require nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. They need those for growth. So nitrogen in particular is used for proteins. It's used for leaf growth. It's really important for photosynthesis. Phosphorus is more in production of flowers and fruit. It is still used in the process of photosynthesis. Potassium is also used for both photosynthesis and respiration, also used in flowering and fruit growth. But also you need to be aware of what your plants require, what's going to be best for them. So you need to make sure that you know that so you can manipulate. So the reasons we want to know all this about our physical factors is so that we can improve their commercial plant production. And this is yield, so how much is produced, the quality of your crop, so how good it tastes or how the flavor is or what is the color, and also the timing. You're trying to meet particular markets or get them to market at a shortest period of time, or you're trying to grow them out of season. So you're going to be using the techniques that we talked about before, that we're going to be talking about in a moment, to manipulate those factors in order to get good crop yield, good quality, and good timing. Okay, so we'll just break those down into a little bit more depth. So you obviously trying to optimize your yield. So that's your quantity, how much you're getting. Usually in commercial production, you are meeting contracts. So you're trying to supply a specific amount at a specific time, at a specific quality for a market. If you don't supply that, you will be penalized for that. So you need to be able to try and manipulate that yield to get that sufficient volume. Most people will try and produce more than they need so that they get what they need. However, some physical factors can be modified to improve that. However, sometimes you can't modify all the physical factors, or it's not economic to do so. So you have to work with what you've got. But ideally, you're going to try and do that the best of your ability. Okay, and your best of your ability is trying to get good quality. So good quality means it will sell. So you want to deliver fresh products, very to your best of your ability. So depending on your crop will be depending on what that quality looks like. So it could be a particular shape, it could be a particular size, it could be a particular taste, it might be a particular bricks level. Okay, fresh products need to be of a much higher quality than a processed product. So a processed product is for juicing or going into products that are going to be used somewhere else, so make pies or something else. And that usually receives a lower price. And you're usually not aiming for the processing market. You're usually aiming for a fresh market, and then whatever you can't sell in that market drops down. Okay, and lastly, timing. So once again, this is you're trying to get to meet a market. So you're trying to produce a particular amount of product to a particular time to meet a particular market. So Christmas is coming up. One of our things for Christmas is people like to buy red plants, and in this case, poinsettias. These are actually short day plants, and that means that they don't normally grow at this time of the year. So they need to be grown in a controlled environment because they need a short day and a long night to be able to flower, to make them that red colour. So you need to be able to manipulate them to get there. And the other one I've given there is red roses for Valentine's Day. Roses grow throughout the summer, but the optimum time is now. So they need to be grown in hydroponic or in glass houses and they need to be manipulated to make sure that you have enough for Valentine's Day. Okay, no one wants red roses on the 15th of February. Everyone wants them on the 14th. So you need to be able to manipulate your crop to get there. So to do that, sometimes we have to sow differently, we have to harvest differently, we have to manipulate our techniques, and we'll look at some of that shortly. The next thing for timing is looking at the seasons and trying to grow them within a crop. So, to grow a crop within that season. So, for example, things such as sweet corn, watermelon, pumpkins, we generally grow outside, and therefore they can only be grown in our summer period. Okay, we can't grow them in the winter, mainly because they require a soil temperature of over 15 degrees. Some plants need long days, so that means they need summer conditions. So we will grow those only in protected environments. Some are need a lot of looking after. So to do that well, we need to be doing that in glass houses as well. So some require growing degree days. So we need to be making sure that we are doing that in places that get those that amount of light. If you don't sow them at the appropriate time, then they don't get enough, and their crops won't reach maturity. So you need to, for example, maize, a particular type of maize grows in Southland because it requires a lower amount of growing degree days compared to with the North Island. We can grow ours for longer. Okay, so it depends on what you're trying to grow. And lastly, there is you're trying to manipulate high volume of high quality crops. And so you're manipulating them all the time, and you are trying to get those crops to market quickly. So most of those are grown in glass houses or in very good commercial operations. Okay, so we're going to move now into just looking what do we mean by plant production. And so we just very briefly going over the plant processes. This is your merit, moving into your merit. So the plant processes that are most common in this area are photosynthesis, respiration, transpiration, osmosis and nutrient uptake, and germination. Okay, you can use others, but those are the ones that are most commonly used. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but you need to understand that photosynthesis is required for plants making their own food. So you want to manipulate this as much as possible. So you're wanting to have optimum water, optimum light, make sure they have optimum amount of nitrogen, and that their temperature is optimum. If you don't have those, then it is reduced. Also, if you are looking there, if on the screen, you'll see how they use the product of photosynthesis. So for those 7 things, okay, we need to be maximizing that as much as possible. If we don't, they don't grow to their capacity. So you might like to pause here and read this later. Okay, moving on to respiration. Once again, we're trying to optimize this. So optimum amount of oxygen in the soil. And if we don't do that, then they don't convert that energy. They're not going to have that energy. They're not going to be able to use it through the plant. Okay, they're not going to be able to respire so well. So they need it to convert those nutrients back into energy for growth and repair. So it is affected by the amount of water, we've already said. We've already said it's affected by the temperature, and we've said that it's affected by how much oxygen's in the soil. So just showing you there that process. And then transpiration, remember this is taking water from the roots, going right the way up through the plant, and it evaporates out the plant leaves. So we want an optimum amount of transpiration to occur, but if it is short on anything, then this will affect it. So if it's water shortage, this can't be carried out, so it will wilt. If there's too much wind, transpiration occurs much faster because it takes that water particle off the leaves. If there's too much light or heat, same thing will happen. Humidity, if it's too high, it can't transpire because there's too much water in the air. And also the thickness and waxiness of the leaves will play a part here. Normally that is to do with the type of plant you've picked. Okay, osmosis. This is how it gets the water, the fluids through the membranes into the root here. So this can be affected if there isn't enough water in the soil. And remember, this is the process it's used to get minerals out of the soil into the plant and used in their production. So, and also used in how we look at nutrient uptake. So plants require nutrients and they need some of that out of the soil. So that's taken up through the plant and then taken to the rest of the cells. So osmosis and nutrient uptake is sort of hand in hand here. And if this doesn't occur, then you're not going to get that transport of nutrients. Okay, you can read the rest of that yourself. And I think lastly, we're looking at seed germination. So this is where it needs an optimum amount, usually of the wow factors, which is water, oxygen, and warmth. Does depend on the crop you're looking at, so be mindful of that. Some crops do need light, so just be mindful of which crop you're talking about. But basically, we need those at optimum: water, oxygen, and warmth. It breaks the dormancy by swelling the seed. It takes in water and it breaks that seed coat and activates those enzymes to start the germination process. It does need a little bit of oxygen to do this. So if it's too deep in the soil or it won't be able to reach the surface, if there's not enough oxygen or it's too wet, that also affects that germination. Okay, this one is showing you just a little bit more detail about that, so you can pause there and continue reading. Okay, now I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about growth and development because this affects how the plant grows. So this is broken up into the next 7 areas, I think. So bud and flower, pollination, crop ripening, fruit set, colour of the fruit, sugar levels, flowering, and root growth. Now, once again, these will depend on which crop you are looking at. So some are more important than others. So if we look at the growth and development of plant, we need to be able to getting it from a young plant right through to maturity, but we're also looking at how the plant grows and matures and through to harvest for its fruiting crop. So here is showing you that life cycle of an apple crop. So we need to be able to get shoots to grow. So usually these are on deciduous plants, particularly because they're dormant through the winter, so they've lost their leaves, and the shoots, the buds are just sitting there waiting for warmer temperatures and increased in light. Once they do that, we call it a bud burst because they literally burst open in the response to those warmer conditions, and then the plant will start to grow. We call this a growth flush when it's growing rapidly, and they generally require warm, humid climate with plentiful water and nutrients. Once again, with roots, we require root structure to occur and plants to put down really good roots. They need roots to be able to absorb that oxygen, as we've said, but also to get nutrients out of the soil. Some are shallow rooted, and so some plants are shallow rooted, so we need to be mindful of that. Some crops are really deep rooted, and that will play a different part in their crop and how they grow. Okay, but once again, we need to manipulate this to ensure we have warmer temperatures so that the activation of the enzymes occur and we get enough water into the plant for all the plant processes to occur. Will be impacted by the soil structure and texture as well. Flower initiation, so usually this is to do with how much chill requirements it needs or heat requirements, once again depending on the crop. These need to occur, they usually occur well in advance of the actual emergence of the flowers. So this can be between 6 and 12 months prior to that emergence of those flowers. So we need to have those optimum heat and chill requirements. If you don't have enough nutrients, they don't set good flowers, so therefore you're not going to get fruit. Remember, you need those flowers to get the fruit. You need to have good light. If there's not enough light in there, those buds won't set. And you need to have good temperatures and, once again, optimum water. Pollination here is played a part by its pollination vectors. So whether that's wind, insect, or bird, you need to have those available. So if there's no wind, there will be very little pollination occur. Likewise with insects and birds. So you need to make sure you understand that in order to get good pollination to occur. Once again, pollination, remember, is just getting those pollen grains to the stigma. Fertilization is when the pollen tube actually grows down from that pollen grain right down and into the ovaries and fertilizes those eggs. So if that doesn't occur, then you're not going to get good seed. Most will need for seed to be fertilized before it actually produces a fruit. So not all, it once again depend on the crop that you're looking at. We can do self-fertilization or cross-pollination. So they're both on there. You can look at that if you're not sure what those are. Fruit set, we've talked about this a lot. It's basically the retention of that fruit on the plant. So this is after the flowers have been fertilized and pollinated and fertilized, and then we have fruit on there, tiny little fruit buds, and usually the tree will produce way more than it needs. So you need to be able to make sure that it has all the things that it needs for good fruit set. So if it doesn't have enough mineral nutrients, or it doesn't have enough of the correct physical factors, such as too much light or not enough, or too cold, not enough water, etc., then the fruit set is not very good. You're wanting to optimize that. You can see on that picture at the bottom of grapes, that's not a good fruit set. You see there that you have got grapes that are absolutely perfect for harvesting, right through to grapes that are green and tiny and some that have died. So that is not a good fruit set. You're wanting to have that as even as possible. You're wanting to harvest them all at the same time. Growing of that fruit, once again, is important as well, because once we've got those little fruitlets on there, you want them to maximize. You don't want them to stop growing. They will stop growing if they don't get enough nutrients, carbohydrates, nitrogen, etc. So we need to optimize that as much as possible. And now lastly, moving into fruit ripening, we need to be able to get that fruit to ripen. We will have optimum harvesting times, optimum maturity, and then there's often a short window to harvest, and then they go into being overripe. So as you can see with those tomatoes at the bottom, you're wanting that optimum perfect ripening, because if it goes too far, then people don't want them. That is your quality gone. So optimum there. Oh, I just jumped one. Here's just showing you what influences, what plant processes and what physical factors has a big play or plays a big part on that plant growth and development. You can look at this yourselves later. Okay, so growth lastly, that's the last part of this, is how well it grows and its growth rates. So we're trying to optimize those growth rates. We don't want them to increase and then decrease and fluctuate. We want them to be sort of just continues on optimizing its growth. We want it to make sure that it gets that quality, quantity, and timing really well. Okay, right. So for achieved, you need to be able to choose some techniques to modify those physical factors. You need to have 2 physical factors with a minimum of 2 techniques to pass this paper. You need to be able to state how to carry out that technique and state what the physical factor does to the plant, how it affects its growth. So does it increase it? Does it decrease it? What does it actually do? Okay, so we're going to move now into those techniques, and these techniques will cover quite a few of the physical factors. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time through them. We're just going to go through relatively quickly. For merit, you need to know why it's done and link it back to everything I've just talked about. So plant processes, plant production, and plant growth. Okay, so all of those things there on the slide shows you or what can be used to modify light. So there's a lot of things there. Depending on the context that you are given will depend on which ones of those you choose. Okay, so for example, if they've given you maize, that's going to look at site selection and crop row orientation and its spacing and its weed control. Okay, if you're looking at growing capsicums indoors, you're going to be looking at the cladding of those controlled environments, the shade cloth that may be used, the artificial lighting, the crop row orientation, etc. Okay, so very briefly there, looking at weed control, these compete with the plant, so you're wanting to reduce that as much as possible. There are some ideas up there and tell you why we want to reduce those weeds. So all of these you can pause on later. So here is pruning. We predominantly do this to optimize light, and there's some talking there about why we would do it, looking at the quality, quantity, price, and timing. So you can pause this later on and consider that as well. Training, once again, is trying to get the plant to grow particular ways to optimize that light, also to optimize the amount of air around the plant for ventilation, because that reduces the humidity and then reduces disease. Thinning, we remove some of the plant material or the fruit itself to ensure there is good circulation of air. And we also stake trees and plants to stop wind movement or to train them to grow upwards to get more light. Okay, once again with temperature, there's a whole way there to increase temperature. There's a lot of ways there to reduce temperature. So once again, that will depend on your crop. Okay, so it can be indoors. We increase with temperatures, heating, use mulch outside in terms to reduce it. We can do fans, whitewashing, or to break dormancy, such as putting in a fridge for chilling. Oh, I just jumped there. So protected environments, shade houses, plastic houses, row covers. These are just some examples of increasing that temperature. There's some looking at soil, so heating soil, so looking at mulches, looking at putting on heat pads, looking at using plastic to increase that soil temperature. We can heat the air with the glasshouses with pumping heaters or using gas or solar, etc., and ducting it through, increasing that temperature. If we want to modify frosts, we're usually trying to minimize this, trying to get as little frost damage as we can. So windmills, wind machines, wind fans, helicopters, diesel burners, frost pots, stack pots, overhead sprinklers, and frost cloth. They will all try and reduce those frost. Okay, so basically you're trying to increase that air temperature. So remember, hot air rises, cold air sinks. So you're trying to reverse that and try and mix up the air so it increases that temperature. So there's 4 examples there in those diagrams. We're trying to stop that frost. And then modifying water, so we can increase it using irrigation and scheduling. We can maintain it, such as using mulches or tensonometers or conservation tillage, terracing or contouring, and we can decrease it using drainage and drainage management. Okay, so I haven't gone into these techniques in a lot of depth. You should have covered all these in your classes. So here's looking at measuring soil water, so knowing how much you've got. So examples there are looking at neutron probes, gravimetric soil sampling, tensonometers, water scheduling, Aquafix tape. Those are all examples. You're trying to work out how much water it has so that you can either add irrigation, add water to it, or make sure the drainage is there, or not scheduling water because it's already too wet. So those are all examples of increasing soil water. I'm not going to go in those in depth, but they're all used for different reasons in different areas for different crops. They are looking at decreasing water, so mostly looking at subsoiling or humping and hollowing, and drainage methods such as tile, mole, and open. Maintaining, so these are tensonometers or mulches or conservation tillage or terracing and contouring. So that's trying to maintain the water that you have without losing it. Humidity. So here we will increase humidity predominantly in glass houses or covered tents. We try to increase the water content in it and try and keep it warmer. So that increases that humidity, so you have better growth. Hail. I've got hail netting, insurance, rockets and cannons. In this country, we predominantly only use hail netting. Most places cannot get hail insurance anymore. And generally in New Zealand, we don't use hail rockets or hail cannons, but in other parts of the world, they do, with varying success. If we want to modify the air, we usually either add carbon dioxide, oxygen, or nitrogen. So here you're going to add propane gas or burning of it, You can add carbon dioxide into the air. You could just open the windows or the doors of your glass houses, and to add nitrogen is usually through fertilizer application or growing companion plants such as clover. Wind, here we use shelter belts or providing that shelter, or just by staking and tying. So making sure that we're protecting that crop from the wind. So it can be a row, as it says there, and I've given you some information on why we want to do that, what impact it has on those plants. So you can read that yourself if you come back and pause the video. And then topography, we can manipulate topography such as doing contours, but just site selection, initial site selection is probably your biggest. We can also use tree planting to reduce soil erosion or terracing. So not a huge amount can be done here, but you definitely can manipulate it. There's a little bit more detail on site selection. You're usually trying to choose your site best right at the start. So growing kiwi fruit in good areas right at the start will improve your crop yield. If you're going to try and grow them in very cold conditions, then that's probably not sensible. Once again, how you establish that crop right at the start, what way you put the orientation of the rows, what you do to the soil, what fertilizers you add, how you set up irrigation, and all of that will play a huge part on the ongoing success of your crop. If you do this well at the start, you have got a very good crop. Okay, and lastly, I think modifying the soil here, we can add fertilizers, we can lime, we can control that nutrition, we can add nutrients, we can add mulches, we can put in compost, and we can do fertigation through adding nutrients into irrigation. So these will all provide nutrients to the crop. And as I said, I haven't covered those in a huge amount of depth because there's just so much of them. Okay, right, finishing off. So to get merit, you need to explain why those techniques are used. So you need to link them to the plant processes, the plant growth, and or the growth rates. You also need to link that to so you carry out what's of them. So you once again, if you linking from you can achieve because you are then wanting synthesis can utilize. I'm not going to go through all this to achieved your technique through into what answers. So come here and you can read this in much better detail. So reasons for carry out using those techniques. What are they doing to the crop? Okay, so those are all giving you some examples. Excellence. For excellence, you need to state why they're used. Three things. You're usually doing economic, environmental, and social. Now, environmental, you've just on what it mentally. Okay, so you need to be talking about the good or bad impacts on these things. I'm going to compare those techniques, or you'll justify. So I've just got examples. Once again, merit word, linking those from merit to excellence, so you can look at that yourself. So here are some examples on economic. I'm not going to go through them, but what impact does this technique have? Does it reduce labour, so therefore you're saving costs, or does it have a high running cost, so therefore it's a bigger cost to you? What is the purpose of what economically, why would you do this technique? Okay, what impact does it have? Likewise for environmental here, you're talking about what that does. If no-tilling reduces rate of erosion, so that's great. It might increase biodiversity. It might cause runoff. That's not good. So state what is the problem with the technique. Some are amazing, some are not. So you need to, once again, be clear. And then lastly, looking at social, what impact does this have socially? So positive is increased employment and more spending in rural areas. A negative might be that if we can't harvest because of a hail event, then you can't export, so you're not going to employ people. So you can have a look through these. There are some examples from previous years. Okay, so just summarising up, you've got your physical factors. It needs to link to plant processes, which needs to link to your techniques, which needs to link to whether you're increasing or decreasing your crop yield quality and timing, and then it needs to link to your economic, social, and environmental impacts. That is your excellent answer. Moving through those 5 areas. If you don't do that, you can't reach excellence. Okay, just quick note. I know we're just about wrapping up. So you need to have a good understanding of how those plant processes directly link through to quality, quantity, and your economics, so crop yield, etc. If you don't have those links, you aren't going to do well in this paper. Okay, you need to have direct links and full understanding about that environmental sustainability. You can't just repeat the physical factors. Physical factors are not environmental sustainability. So this is your excellence part of the answer. Oh, sorry, it jumped. And that's just providing an example from last year. So I'm not going to go over that. I've just put it there. You can pause and read that yourself. Okay, I have got up some questions here. This is so 3 slides left. So this is the achieve part. It is asked for an example from last year. It's looking on airflow. It's looking about 2 management practices to modify airflow. And in this case, there's 3 examples there showing you how you could modify. So pause here and you can read that yourself. Then I have a merit question using 2 of those examples, how and why you would do it. And this is relating back to your plant processes. So in the first one, you're looking at transpiration, and the second one is looking about pollination. Okay, be specific. You need to use these words. If we don't see a plant process in there, you can't get merit. So linking it through to what's happening to the plant. And then here was the excellence. This time it talked about economic and social. So it's given you some issues, what the problem was. You had to justify one of those management practices. In this case, they've justified artificial shelter belts, and then they've talked about the economic and social reasons for doing that. Okay, so once again, you can read that by pausing the video. All right, any questions?
It looks like that's about it. There's no questions in the chat.
Perfect.
Cool. We might as well. Anything else to add?
No, just good luck. Yep.
Cool.
It's pretty comprehensive.
So the exams, I'm guessing, must be next Tuesday?
Yes. Yeah. No, Wednesday. Sorry.
Wednesday. That's fine. Sweet. So we'll see everyone else in the tutorial on Monday for the last exam. But other than that, if you do have any questions, you can also just go to study it in the description. But once again, just a thank you to Kerry for spending the time to go over this exam. And other than that, ka kite and have a good day.
Yep. Good luck.